Amen. Thank you. Eric and Stephen have been passing out new sheets. If you don't have one, raise your hand. Wednesday night, when Carl was teaching class, he said, Ken, can he do this? And my wife said later, why did he raise his fist? And I said, that's the Jordan River. Anybody else, when it hit her, she got really tickled. But she thought you were just raising your fist for some unknown reason. All right, we're going to be on page 19. Thank you, Stephen. Eric. We're going to be on page 19. I'm going to pick up with point number 25. The Lord went to Phoenicia, the northernmost point of his personal ministry. Now, Jesus is in his great Galilean ministry. Remember, I want you to kind of get it in your mind, the 8-point outline. You don't have to have it down 1 through 8. Have a general idea of the life of Christ summed up in 8 points. His birth and infancy is the very first thing. Then his period of preparation. Then he begins his ministries. The next 5 points are going to be ministries. He starts out in the early Galilean ministry. Now, how do I know it's whether Judea or Galilee? Because G comes before J in the alphabet. Okay? So the early Galilean ministry comes first. Then the early Judean ministry. All right. Then he goes back up to Galilee for the great Galilean ministry where he is right now. Then he goes back down to Judea for his later Judean ministry. He has 2 ministries in Galilee and 2 ministries in Judea. Then he crosses the Jordan into Perea for his Perean ministry. And then point number 8, the last days. It's easy to remember. The last days comprise 8 days. Okay? From Sunday, when he made his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, until the following Sunday, when he was what? Raised from the dead. All right. Jesus did not stay strictly in Galilee when he was in his great Galilean ministry. He made several trips to Jerusalem. He made one trip to the Decapolis, which is on, well, let me give you the Jordan River again. All right, which is across the Jordan on the eastern side. He made one trip there to heal whom? He healed one man, the Gadarene demoniac. When he did that, he comes back to Galilee. Now he's going to Phoenicia. Phoenicia, at this particular time, is technically outside the boundaries of Palestine. But when the Romans took over, became the world empire, in BC 63, when Pompey overthrew Jerusalem, Palestine included Phoenicia and Syria. Today, that is not part of the Holy Land, as we say. So the Romans incorporated Phoenicia into Syria. And so Palestine was much larger than we see on our maps today. If you were to look at a map of Palestine right now, earlier, it even included Cilicia, where Paul was born. But so much for that. Syro-Phoenician, some translations call her the Syro-Phoenician woman, Syro-Phoenician, Syro meaning Syria, because Syria and Phoenicia were one country, even though they were a few miles apart. The Syro-Phoenician woman, or Canaanite woman, and the whole shebang was called Canaan. I mean Syria, I mean Phoenicia, I mean Philistia, the whole thing was called Canaan. This Canaanite woman comes up to Jesus and cries out, "Have mercy on me, O Son of David." But Jesus doesn't answer her one word. He totally ignores her. Why would he do this? He has. Now, whatever you say, I can't say it's wrong, but we are just guessing on this. I think it was to test her faith, to see how badly she wanted his help. I always taught my children, all right, it's time for you to get a job. You've been there. All right, you go up to Brookshire's or whatever store you have in your town, and you put in an application. They'll come back and say, Daddy, they said they're not hiring. I said, go back next week. Daddy, they're not hiring. I said, I don't care what they said. Go back next week. They go back next week and they're not hiring. I said, go back next week. You see my point? And many of you parents have done the same thing. What are we trying to do? What are we teaching our children? Yeah, you see the unfortunate widow who kept going to the judge. He finally caved in to get her off his back. These employers want to see how badly you want this job. And I guarantee you they will hire you. That's a no-brainer. And now they're teaching their children to do this. This is the way it is in this world. Persistence is the name of the game. So anyway, Jesus was not trying to be ugly to the woman by shunning her. In Romans 1:16, we have the phrase, to the Jew first and also to the Greek. It is also mentioned in the 2nd chapter of Romans, verses 9 and 10. To the Jew first and also to the Greek. What does that mean? It doesn't mean to the exclusion of the Greek or the Gentile. Simply to the Jew first. Now, paint me a picture. Exactly. God chose Abraham, who became the father of the Jewish nation. That's the foundation. Now, the Gentiles are going to be in the building, but they are not the foundation. The foundation is the Jewish nation. And so God wanted to establish that foundation in Judaism, and then the Jews themselves, like Dale said, would be teaching the Gentiles. If it weren't for the Jews, the Gentiles would never have become, God-fearers. And then in Romans, the first 3 chapters, the whole point is that the Jews rejected Christ, and that's when he cut them off. And what did he do? What did he do to the olive tree? He grafted an unnatural branch. That's the Gentiles. So God never shunned it. While the Jews were under Judaism, what were the Gentiles under? The patriarchal law. He never had anybody who was not under some law, which means that he was concerned about everybody's soul. But here again, in his ministry, he's dealing with the Jews. He's still establishing this foundation, and he's basically saying, look, my mission is not to work with you people. But he never turned down an opportunity, did he? Never. When any Gentile came to him, he acquiesced to their wishes. All right, so he's, tell you what, just turn to Romans, Matthew 15. He basically is saying, look, I'm not come to work with you Gentiles. In verse 24, I was not sent but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But she came and worshipped him, saying, here's her persistence. Lord, help me. And he answered again. Here's the second time he's trying to basically put her off. It is not meet or proper to take the children's bread and cast it to the dogs. Was he calling her a dog? This is the Greek word kanarion, from which we get our word canine. It's a diminutive, which means puppy. He is calling her a little puppy. The picture is this. And again, we've all been in this scenario. We're sitting down and eating, and either your family or you're visiting, the visiting family, the house whom you're visiting, has a pet dog or a pet cat. The children are sitting down and eating. What are those children going to naturally do? Drop a crumb or two? It's natural. I did this last week when I was in some friend's house. We were eating and they had a dog under the table, and I just took a piece, fed it to the dog. It is natural. This is what she's saying. The Lord's saying, look, the meal is not prepared for the puppy. We prepared for the people. And she comes back and says, yeah, but the people feed the puppies. Wasn't that a great response? A tremendous, that touched the Lord. That right there sold him. And he commended her faith. And this is one of the greatest lessons on faith anywhere in the New Testament. All right?
She was revealing that in her heart it was that to believe she had the right to believe that he is, and that he is the reward for those who diligently seek.
Exactly. I gave this illustration, might seem like a stupid illustration, but you call a police officer because you've got some disturbance going on in the next door neighbor's house. He comes out there, and you go out there and say, look, my dog is caught in the fence. Can you come over here and get him out? He could say, look, that's not my mission. My mission is to go to this disturbance at this neighbor's house. But he goes over there and takes care of that dog. Did he abort his mission? No, he did not. And that's what the woman basically was saying. Look, Lord, I understand your mission. But can't you stop long enough to feed a puppy some crumbs? That's the whole point. But again, Jesus, I think Stan and I were talking about this one time, Jesus never turned down an opportunity to help people. Gentile or Jew, didn't matter. Now, the very next thing that takes place is the Transfiguration. We're not going to get into it because I brought a devotional a couple of weeks ago, and in which I was discussing the recognition and memory and identity in the spirit world. And I brought to your attention the Transfiguration in Matthew 17. Just briefly touching on some points. Who went up on the top of the Mount of Transfiguration? Jesus took his three inner disciples, his inner apostles, Peter, James, and John, as he did when he went to the garden. Okay. These men were very close to Jesus. And the others, at one time, they got a little heated, asking who is the greatest in the kingdom, because they were seeing some favoritism. But anyway, these three are going up in their earthly bodies, and all of a sudden, there are two other personages transfigured or metamorphosized before them. Who are they? Old Testament characters. Moses and Elijah. Then Jesus is transfigured. He's changed. So you have three in their earthly body and three in their spiritual body. Okay? And so they talk. No doubt they talk, we know they talk about his demise, his upcoming death. Anyway, they come back down to the foot of the mountain, and that leads us into the next story, and that is the question that Jesus asked his apostles, whom do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? All right? To which they answered. So Jesus says, look, men, who does the world say I am? And they said, what are some of the possibilities? You were a prophet, specifically you were John the Baptist, Elijah, Jeremiah. You were one of the great prophets. And then he says, but whom say ye that I am? Now, he wasn't interested in what the world says. This is kind of a door opener. He's been with them. The Great Galilean ministry lasted 1 year and 9 months. His whole ministry lasted 3 years. So they've been with him over 2 years at this time. Because they're in the last 6 months of the Great Galilean ministry. All right? Been with him almost 2 years. He wants to know how much of my teaching have you absorbed? Because see, when he was raised from the dead, they still didn't grasp that. Because they went to the tomb and they saw an empty tomb, and what was their reaction? They were scared. They didn't say, oh, he fulfilled his word, he's not here, he was raised. No, they had a totally adverse reaction, or a reaction of being fearful. They should have known he said he would be raised from the dead. He is not here, therefore he was raised from the dead. So they were very different. I doubt it. I doubt it. I don't fault the apostles at all. And then when Thomas asked to see the nail prints in the hand, we've attached the appellation to him, doubting Thomas, which I think is unfair. Because what did the other apostles do? They did the same thing. How come they're not called doubting apostles? Jesus simply showed him the wounds. He didn't chide him. He didn't chew him out. You ought to have more faith than that. No. If someone asks for evidence, what's wrong with that? There's nothing wrong with asking for evidence. Even infidels. I'll even acquiesce to an infidel who says, how do we know that Quirinius was a governor twice in Syria? Well, first of all, he wasn't a governor. He was a high state official in charge of the census. I'm going to sit down with that infidel and I'm going to show him the proof that Quirinius was a state official on 2 occasions. One, he was the governor, and one, he was the high official in charge of the census. I don't fault that infidel for asking for evidence. I know he had sinister motives, but I'm going to give you the evidence anyway. So Jesus simply says, here are my wounds. Feel them. All right. Jesus.
I bring this up a lot, I guess I shouldn't, but I think it's important to bring that you talking about, they didn't understand, they didn't know. That we have God's word today. And through it, some did disagree with me, brother. Through it, the Holy Spirit works. Through the word.
Right.
The Holy Spirit did not come upon them. After the Holy Spirit came upon them, they understood.
In fact, Dale, he was to come to reveal these things to them.
Yes, because they did. So then, today, when you take that scenario for me, then that brings a lot more importance to the word that we have, because that's the way that God works on us through His Spirit. It's through the word.
Right.
And we disregard the word, if we don't consume the word, if we don't study the word, if we don't obey the word, the Spirit has no place to live.
Right. It also teaches us to be patient with people and teach and teach and teach and teach. Because you can teach something once or twice and it's not going to take. But if you teach it 5, 6, 7 times, it's going to begin to gel. And we need to be very patient. Teachers need to be patient with their students. Parents need to be patient with their children. In teaching my grandson Greek, I'm very patient on him. I've taught him and taught him and taught him and taught him, but there are a few things he hasn't grasped yet. I don't chide him. I don't say, look, I've told you this 2 or 3 times. I don't do that. I said, listen. Pardon? Well, you've been a student for 7 years. Anyway, And so we are very patient, and one day it's going to hit them. Oh, I see it now. I see it now.
I think oftentimes we might shortchange the disciples too. Because how busy was Jesus? How exhausted were they?
Oh, totally.
Can you imagine just trying to keep up with Jesus?
He was like the, what is it, ever ready batter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're ready for money.
Yeah, the money. He was,
But if everything Jesus had ever said or done had been recorded, what would it say?
your library, mine couldn't hold the body.
This information that he was putting out, and even though they had a lot of lessons that he gave them where, we think, well, they all got that, they should have understood that. Well, I'm sure, if he were to be here today, he'd say, how many times have you read Matthew? You still don't did this, that, whatever. And so I think oftentimes when we put ourselves in their shoes, they're trying to overcome years and years and years of religious teaching, their own Jewish prejudice.
Exactly.
Then trying to absorb all of the lessons that Jesus is giving to them. And so then, for them to not grasp it, I think we need to be a little more understanding.
Well, see, that's a good point, Carl. They had their Jewish prejudices before he ever called them to be apostolic. And he's having to diffuse these and teach a new way. And that is not easy. Both Carl and I have baptized people from all kinds of churches, and they come over and they cannot make a clean break with understanding the gospel. They try to bring in some of what they have been taught for decades into the gospel, and it's up to us to patiently show them the difference. I had one guy that thought he could still live above sin because he came from a holiness church, and that's what they taught. Eventually, it jailed in him, in his heart, and he understood clearly, but not for a long time. And so that's a good point, Carl. We really can't fault the apostles because we're the same way today. So Jesus asked this question, but notice, where does he ask this question? Whenever Jesus taught, and this applied to all rabbis, they taught with respect to something at hand. They didn't sit down and say, picture a man climbing a mountain, and blah, blah, blah. They saw that man climbing a mountain. And they taught a lesson from a show and tell perspective. Again, when he told the parable of the sower, they were watching a man out there in the fields of Galilee sowing seed. The fishermen, when they were taught about lessons, they were in the process of catching fish. So here, when he said, who do men say that I, the Son of Man, am? And then who say ye that I am? You have to understand where he was. He was at Caesarea Philippi, which is on the eastern side of the Jordan River, just a few miles north of the northernmost point of the Sea of Galilee. I'm going to back up and give you a little history that I think will hopefully enhance the picture. Alexander the Great was born in BC 356. He died at the age of 32. Some references will say he died at age 33, but he died 1 month shy of his 33rd birthday. He had the largest kingdom, empire, larger than the Roman Empire, 2 million square miles. And his father was Philip II of Macedon. Macedon was a huge country. Greece was only a part of that. So today's Greece was not Macedon. Philip took over a country called Krenis, Krenis, Nidas. He renamed it Philippi. That's where the jailer in Lydia, Acts 16, it was called Chronicus. And so, having taken that country over, or that city, he built a huge temple. And then his daughter was going to get married. So he was going to host the wedding in that temple. He therefore had all the statues of the 12 Greek gods marked in, one after the other. And he had a statue made of himself to be the 13th statue. 13 statues, his soldiers considered that very blasphemous toward the gods, and they killed him. They murdered him. Now, Alexander's real name is Alexander III of Macedon. All right, his daddy was Philip II of Macedon. At 16 years of age, Alexander the Great was commander-in-chief of the military. 16. I wouldn't have trusted my 16-year-old with being in charge of a dog. And he's in charge of the military. So 4 years later, when his father was murdered, he becomes the king of Macedon, 20 years of age. 6 years later, he begins his assault toward the east, wiping out nobody fought Alexander the Great. He was the greatest general of all time, the greatest. No American general can compete with it. No Israeli general can compete with it. And he went as far as Sutlej, India, when his men said, "Look, we're tired. You are born for war. We are not." They turned around and came back, started going back home. Otherwise, he would have gone forever to the other side of the world. Alexander comes to Caesarea Philippi. It's not named that at this time. It's called Paneas. Paneis. Paneas. The reason it was called Paneas, he named it, by the way, is because it became the worship center of the god Pan, P-A-N. He believed in Pan. Pan was a fertility god. Most all your gods in this day and age were fertility gods. These people believed that these gods were responsible for baby animals being born, human babies being born, the vegetation and the fruit producing trees and the grain. They believed that these fertility gods fertilized everything and brought everything to life and sustained life very bountifully. So when he came to Paneas, he built a shrine to the god Pan. Then he had his soldiers, let me paint this picture. In Syria is a huge mountain called Hermon, over 9,000 feet tall, snow 24/7, as we say, year-round snow. 5 rivers come from the melting snows of Mount Hermon. The Orontes and Leontes in Syria, in Antioch, and then you have the Abana and Pharpar in Damascus, and then you have the Jordan River. All of those come from melting snows from Mount Hermon. And Caesarea Philippi is right there at the base of Mount Hermon. Well, you know what a ridge is? All right, take a mountain like this, a huge mountain, and a ridge is kind of a level place. It may be 300 feet off the ground, but it's still a level place. And this ridge ran out to a certain point, let's say the end of this pew, and then it dropped straight down 100 feet. There is a wall of rock, 100 feet, and at the base of that rock is a cave. A cave. The Greeks call that rock wall the rock of the gods. The rock of the gods. They call the cave the gates of Hades. Does that ring a bell? Matthew 16:18. And the gates of Hades shall not prevail against it, because Hades was their fertility god. And every fall, he would go into that cave, into the netherworld. And he would not come back until around the middle of March. As evidenced by what? How did they know when he left? Because everything is going dormant. How did they know or believe when he came back? When everything started putting out. Hades has come back to bless us. This was their mentality. So Panias became the center of Pan worship in that known world. Everybody from every quarter of the world came to Panias to worship Pan. Jesus had just been over at Capernaum and Chorazin, about 25 miles away, on the northwestern tip of the Sea of Galilee, and he just jumped over a few miles on the eastern side of the Jordan to Panias. In 20 BC, this was 110 years after Alexander set up that shrine to Pan. Caesar Augustus was the first emperor of the Roman Empire. He gave Panias to Herod the Great, who rebuilt and refurbished the city and changed the name to Caesarea in honor of Caesar Augustus. Then, that was in BC 20. In BC 4, Herod the Great died, and Philip became the tetrarch of Beishan, which included Caesarea. He then changed the name to Caesarea Philippi in his own honor. They were so stricken with vainglory. Like Philip of Macedon, he changed that Panaeus to Philippi in honor of me. Well, that's what Philip did. Now remember, Herod the Great had two sons named Philip. One lived in Jerusalem, who was no ruler. This was Philip the Tetrarch, over the area of Beishan, Galenitis, Trachonitis, and others like this. And so he changed. Now we have Caesarea Philippi. That's where Jesus and his apostles are. So Jesus says, "Whom do you say that I am?" And Peter speaks for the rest, because the word is plural, ye. Who say ye? He's not talking to Peter, he's talking to all of them. But Peter was always presumptuous and always the first to put his foot in his mouth. But he had some great admirable qualities. So Jesus said, "Thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus blessed him because they could not have learned this from any earthly source. And Jesus says, "Upon thou art Peter," and what? "And upon this rock I will build my church." Not that rock, pointing to the wall, the rock of the gods. I'm going to build my church on this rock, not that rock. That was the rock of the gods. He said, "I'm not going to build my church on gods." Now here's an interesting thing. There are the Greek language has two demonstrative pronouns. We do too, because we borrowed it from the Greeks. This and that. And Jesus uses both of these in his conversation with the disciples. He says, "Thou art Peter." In Greek, it is the demonstrative pronoun that. That art Peter. What's the difference? How do you picture this and that? That's it. That's it, Dale. This right here is near at hand. That over there is remote. Jesus said, "That art Peter." But, it's a contraction conjunction here. "But I will build my church upon this rock." What do you picture him pointing to when he says this rock? Not that rock, not you, Peter, not that rock of the gods. Me. I'm going to build my church on me. I am the foundation of my church.
Not the creation, but the creator.
Exactly. That's right, Chuck. Right. The apostles being the built into the foundation, Jesus Christ being the cornerstone. I never knew what a cornerstone was until I asked some builders. And I may not have the proper concept now, but I understand everything is centered from that cornerstone. Is that correct? Measured off of it. And so everything is measured off of Jesus Christ. But notice the setting. Now, 4 miles west of Panis, or Caesarea Philippi, was the tribe of Dan. The tribe of Dan. But God did not give them that territory. They stole it. They took it away without authorization. Back in the 13th century BC, the sea peoples, the Philistines, came across the Mediterranean and set up Carl touched on this Wednesday night, and set up in Philistia, the southwestern part of, from your perspective, the southwestern part of Palestine. They came from Carthage. I'm reading there are several scholars who disagree as to pinpointing where the Philistines started. Some say they came from Carthage, others from the Mediterranean Sea, islands like Cyprus, even the Aegean Sea. And where they came across the sea and settled in that area. Now, God had allotted, and the book of Joshua is clear on this, all 12 tribes, all 11 tribes, except Levi, land. I'm giving you this land, Issachar. Zebulun, I'm giving you this land. Manasseh, I'm giving you this land. Well, they gave Dan this land, which would be on the northern border of Philistia today. If you were to look at a map and look at Philistia, you'd see Dan right there. But that's not where Dan settled. So when the Philistines moved in, Amorites lived here, where Philistia is, and the Philistines were so powerful, they pushed the Amorites out and pushed them north. Well, guess who was north? The Danites. So the Danites were forced to live in the mountains. They didn't like that. So they began a northern search for new territory. What was God's law on all of these tribes in order to get their allotted territory, to claim their allotted territory? What was the condition they had to meet? They didn't just go say, I like it here, I'm going to set up here. There were people already living there. These were the heathens. These were the tribes like the Perizzites and the Amorites and the Ammonites and the Jebusites, and on we can go. Their job was to kick these heathens out. Kill them, wipe them out. This was called a holy war. Devoted to destruction is what the original language says. Devoted to destruction. That means devoted to God. Everything was devoted to God. They were not to take even one lamb. They were to kill every human being, every animal. There was only one exception. They could take the gold and the silver and the bronze. But for what purpose only? To put it in the treasury of the house of the Lord. That was the only thing. And we have specific scriptures on everything I'm telling you. The Danites did not whip the Amorites. And many of the other tribes didn't whip the heathen neighbors either. And God left them as a thorn in the flesh. I will teach you. You did not obey my law. Now they're going to be a thorn in your side as long as you live. And they were. So they moved north. And they finally came to a city called, or a town called Laish, Laish, about 4 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, and 4 miles west of Caesarea Philippi. That's where they decided, because it was a very peaceful town. a great location, everything. What's my point for saying that we're only 4 miles from Caesarea Philippi? Or let's go back to Canaan, where they worship Pan. 4 miles away meant what? They were influenced by the idolatry in Paneas. And therefore, the Danites set up what? To the chagrin of God and the other tribes. What did they establish in Dan? They established a hill on which they built temple, shrine, in honor of the golden calf. They had a golden calf, just like those people did in Moses' day. To this day, archaeologists have excavated that very hill. We know exactly where that hill of idolatry is in Old Lake, because it's been unearthed. To this day, there is another evidence for the infidels. How do we know that they really did this? Because archaeologists have unearthed it. Just give God a little more time and He'll unearth everything in the Bible. Do you think that will make the infidels believers? Not at all. Not at all. So I'm saying this had to be an influence on Dan to set up these this golden calf. Do you have any questions that you want to ask, or any comments you want to make?
Was it not in as a whole, the whole, not just there, other places where they didn't destroy, some of them destroyed the people, eventually intermarried, and that was the time.
There were wars, Dale, that were not holy wars. There were wars in which the nation was not devoted to destruction, but there were wars in which they were devoted to destruction. And it would be, there's no rule of thumb, it's only God's call. God's call. If He devoted that country or those people to destruction, so be it. If He decided not to devote these people to destruction, so be it. I can't say anything more than that. Do you have a comment, Carl? No. It was God's call, even though we do not completely understand it. All right. How much time do I have? What? It gives you time to take a deep breath. All right. We're going to pick up now on page 20. The bottom of the page, I have, following the Transfiguration, the Lord performed a miracle which the 9 disciples had been unable to perform, the casting out of a demon. Now, this was the very day after the Transfiguration. So when Peter, James, and John come down from the mountain, the next day, the next morning, this happens. That is recorded in Matthew 17, verses 14 through 21. I don't know that I can even get into it. That's what I'm pausing about. Let me begin by stating verse 14, Matthew 17, 14. And when they were come down to the multitude, there came to him a man kneeling to him and saying, Lord, have mercy on me, on my son, for he is epileptic. One of the qualifications of an elder is not to be epileptic. Did you know that? Untitled means not to be epileptic. I'll hold your curiosity for another week. Thank you very much.